You're listening to the Sass Says podcast. I'm your host, Kristie Overstreet, also known as Sass. I identify as a woman, a wife, and a mother. That should tell you a lot already. And over the last few years, I've learned the value of talk therapy. I have seen how my inner work not only enhances my own well-being, but also my marriage, my parenting, my relationships. And in fact, you wouldn't be hearing this right now if it weren't for the work I've done. My mission is to debunk the misconceptions and stigmas around what therapy is and who it's for. Let's normalize working on our mental health and seeking help when needed. We've all heard of self-care, self-help, and self-love, but do you often wonder how to actually make it all happen? I do. You'll hear strategy-based conversations with professionals, as well as inspiring and validating stories from women who are just like you and me. Think of this podcast as the weekly therapy sessions you didn't know you needed, with a dash of sass, a lot of vulnerability, and me, relentlessly asking, but how? Hello. Okay, so today my guest is Dr. Kristie Overstreet, a clinical sexologist, psychotherapist, and author of Fix Yourself First, 25 Tips to Stop Ruining Your Relationships, as well as the host of the Fix Yourself First podcast. Her mission is to help people improve their relationships by first focusing on the most important relationship they have, the one with themselves, so that they are empowered to create the lives they deserve. Dr. Kristie is the founder of the Therapy Department, a virtual wellness practice that provides counseling, coaching, and consulting throughout the world. Her over 14 years of clinical experience have made her well respected as a real-world relationship and LGBTQIA+ healthcare expert. She created the Transgender Healthcare Dignity Model Certification Program and various online courses for healthcare staff to improve their competency in working with the LGBTQIA+ community. She is a contributor for CNN, Forbes, Huffington Post, Reader's Digest, New York Magazine, Oprah Magazine, The Washington Post, and various other media outlets. Right? I know. Okay, so today we get into sex therapy, sexpectations, sexual shame, and self-esteem. We talk about how to communicate about sex with your partner, the different types of intimacy, and Dr. Kristie shares the importance of her work with the LGBTQIA+ community. So here's our conversation, and as usual, I share my thoughts after. Hey, Dr. Overstreet, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thanks for having me, Kristie. I'm excited to be here to talk with you.
Yeah, I've sort of done the crash course of your podcast and some of your resources over the last few weeks, and all I can say is that I'm going to try to put in an hour what could easily be days worth of information. So I really appreciate you being here, like I said, and there's a lot to cover within this realm of the world, isn't there?
Absolutely. When it comes to ourselves and relationships and growth, there's always something to talk about.
Yeah. So you are on your website as your BFF sex therapist. I want to go two ways. One, I want to know how you landed in this specialty, and then you could talk a little about that, and then talk a little bit about what someone can hope to get out of being your BFF.
Sure. I want to start with how I landed here. It was completely accidental. This was not the plan. To be a sex therapist, I would have never thought in a million years I'd be a sex therapist, much less a therapist. And so it really found me through my own personal failures and the direction I was going with my career, being a biology pre-med student, going to medical school, never even knew therapy was a thing, right? Until going to that failure of not working out on the plan that I wanted to with medical school, dropping everything, going through this really dark and desperate time in my life, and just having this pivot that I knew I wanted to serve and help people. And I always thought it was the route of emergency medicine. I didn't know any different. I had blinders on because you got to do that to get there. And when I had that pivot, I went to work for the state as a child abuse investigator. And doing that, I met a therapist for the first time. So my job was, we'd get a report about something's going on with a kid, emotional, mental, physical, sexual abuse and neglect going on. I would go into the home. I'd interview the kid at school, interview collaterals of people that knew the kid, and then work with my supervisor to make a determination if that kid was safe to stay in that home or do they need to go into some other type of care.
Wow.
Yeah. So in my young 20s, well, mid 20s, doing that really taught me a lot about the world. And it just showed I'm definitely on the path of wanting to serve. Maybe this is it. And then meeting a therapist is like, oh my gosh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. This sounds, and I didn't know a lot about it except this therapist was coming in, helping these kids, and something just clicked for me. And I said, I got to have this. This is my destiny. It's what I'm supposed to do. And so I kept working full time, found a master's program that would let me continue working full time, do that, and then just kind of kept at it and worked in the field of addictions, LGBTQIA plus health, and then started realizing it was really comfortable. Well, maybe not started realizing it was really easy to talk about sex. I've always been pretty comfortable as an adult talking about it with my girlfriends, right? And then notice, a lot of the people that I were dealing with, whether it was an individual or a couple or whatever that dynamic, they were struggling with intimacy, their connection or lack thereof with sex. It was just really hard to talk about. And I knew I had to go get some specific training for that because as a therapist, just your general therapist, we have just a human sexuality, really short course, and that's it. So unless a therapist goes and gets a specialty or certification, you don't really learn about how to work in intimacy and sex. And so Florida is one of the few states that requires you to be certified as a sex therapist to practice sex therapy. And I was practicing in Florida at that time. And I'm like, well, give me the certification. So I did that, then found my way into the doctorate program as a clinical sexologist with a specialty on transgender healthcare as well. So it just kind of evolved. Most importantly, when I got out of my own way and just kind of allowed myself to pivot through that failure. And I'm really glad I did.
Yeah. And even I love the name of your podcast, Fix Yourself First. I think that is one of the biggest reasons why I'm here too, because that aha moment of, oh, it's not everyone else's fault. I can't keep blaming my kids or my husband or my boss on all of my dissatisfaction in life. And even if it's not these great, like, monstrosity dissatisfactions, even if they're just sort of these little everyday things that build up over time, that they really start within ourselves.
They do. And the concept of Fix Yourself First was exactly that. And it was with my own life. And I had so many unhealthy, toxic relationships. And I spent a long time really blaming and pointing the finger at the other person. And I was like, well, he's a problem, not me, even as a therapist, right? For those couple of years. And then I realized, what the common denominator in these patterns and behaviors that were not serving me was me. And so I said, what do I need to work on with me? When I made some of those changes and got healthier, and by chance I was a therapist going through it, then everything around me started shifting. I started putting up with less stuff, less unhealthiness. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm on this path and you are not matched up on that path with me because where you're at, no judgment, but it's just not going to work. And that's a hard path to get on. But once you get on it, it makes it pretty easy to stay on it, especially when you learn how to set boundaries. And so what I work with people in is when you make those changes, everything around you will absolutely change. And I think for us, probably one of our biggest fears is if we make those changes, is the other person going to leave, or are we going to lose interest in them? And then what disruption that causes in our life.
Yeah. No, it's huge. I mean, it's terrifying, and I think you touched on it. And just from my own experience, initially, just to use your phrase, fixing yourself first is so daunting and so hard. And I initially had this little bit of bitter reaction of, well, why do I have to do all the work? I got to go do all this inner work and therapy and everyone around me just benefits from it. That's not fair, and then the more fair, not the more fair, but the more you start to see the benefits in really long-lasting ways for my relationships, it became, well, of course I'm going to do this. Why wouldn't I do this for my marriage, for my kids, for my family, my friends? And then like you said, life, it's kind of like once you get through the initial mud, in a way, life gets easier because you're so secure in yourself, what you, as my mom would say, what you will and you won't do, and that makes it easier to navigate because you're not being as easily influenced and impacted by the people around you. I don't know where else. I'm like still in the process, so I don't have a nice bow necessarily to tie on it right now, but that's where I'm starting to see it's like as difficult as the process starts, it actually makes life easier in the long run.
Yeah, and it's okay that you don't have that bow. Maybe that bow doesn't exist because it's
Yeah,
about
that's
the
true.
journey,
Yeah.
not some place we're going to get. Because goodness knows, if you and I had control of everybody in our lives, we would have bows tied up and it would be all together. But
Yes.
since we don't, we're going to constantly and consistently have something bump up against us that is out of our control, and we're going to have to figure out how to cope and deal. And do we take it out on ourselves with self sabotage? Do we take it out on our partners or on our kids or on our family?
Yeah.
So, like, I'm glad you're on that journey. The fact that you're on the journey is what is huge.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah.
that's great.
Thank you. So, all right. So, getting into more of your work, a sex therapist, like what does that look like on a tangible, real way of working with someone?
Sure. Typically, someone will reach out, they'll send me an email, or they'll connect with me on a DM and say, "Hey, this is what I'm struggling with. Is this normal?" Or "This is happening. What do you think?" And so I get a
Mm-hmm.
lot of questions, and I try to use different platforms to answer those questions. But when it comes down to specific therapy, whether it's an individual or a couple, what it looks like is similar to other therapy in the sense of you get to know each other, you're focusing on what that presenting problem is. For sex therapy, it may be one person has a desire that's different from their partner, and there's a mismatch of libido or drive, aka one person's wanting sex, the other doesn't want anything to do with it because they got 1,000 other things going on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
very normal, very typical. Sometimes it may be someone coming in and say, "Hey, I don't know what I want. I don't know what I like and don't like. I've got some shame around my sexual self, maybe some shame around my sexuality. Maybe I went through trauma growing up and have a difficult time. And then I can't really connect with my partner now, or I keep pushing my partner away. Or the partner comes in and says, I want to connect better. However, I don't know how to approach her because she keeps pushing me away." Also, there's things such as sexual dysfunction, especially with men, with this erectile dysfunction and premature ejaculation difficulties they're having, that's affecting their confidence and their sexual self esteem, which causes them to shut down, back off, and really beat themselves up. So I do a lot of work with men as well. And then how they communicate with their partners and things that they do that actually gets in the way of that communication.
Yeah.
So it's like looking at that saying, what are you dealing with? What's happening? Do you have shame around religious guilt about what you should be doing or shouldn't be doing, which is a big one, especially for us. Um, I grew up in a very conservative small town in the southern part of Georgia where,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking maybe 4 red lights now, super small, conservative, where you didn't talk about sex, much less have it, right? Because if you don't talk about it, that means no one's having it, right? And you're supposed to wait till you're married. And then once you get married, the sex is just supposed to naturally happen and everyone's going to be happy. And that's just not reality. So every single one of us bring our own judgments, bias, assumptions, and shame often
Mm-hmm.
into these relationships we're connecting in. So an individual may sit with me virtually and say, here's what I'm dealing with. So I'll walk through and say, what was it like? What were you told? What messages happened? What were you told about sexuality? And how was it discussed or was it not discussed? And looking at a little bit of that history and how that applies to the person's current self, and are they keeping that narrative there, is a great way to kind of navigate how do you work to move forward. And most importantly, in sex therapy, the individual or the couple, depending on who I'm working with, they've got to have goals. Like, what is my goal? Like, what do I want to get from this work? I don't set the goals. That individual or the couple sets those goals. My job is to help them identify a goal and then me give them the strategies, tips, and tools to get there, and accountability.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a big believer of homework after every session of any kind of work I do. I'm like, okay, we can talk about this and feel good about it or work all day in this session. But the real work comes when you and I sign off and you're taking all this stuff we talked about and you're applying it. And then the next time we have a session, I'm going to check in. How did it go? What worked? What didn't work? What do we need to tweak? What's happened since then? Because therapy doesn't fix things for people. People fix things for people when
Mm-hmm.
they're applying it. And I think
Mm.
that's what's missed a lot of times when it comes to therapy.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. That's a really great point because I mean, what's therapy? Maybe an hour a day, right?
Yes.
And so going back, you said something to the effect of, we just expect sex to be just something we do, something we figure out. And you were speaking about it in relation to where you grew up and how it wasn't talked about. And it was this really taboo subject. Do you think, and it just made me think, do we do we know just how to have sex? Like, I've never really thought about that before. And I think when you think of the age in which a lot of people start having sex, I mean, that encounter might be their first real experience with it ever, whether it's being talked about or what. So I guess my question started as, how do we know how to have sex? But is it more so maybe, what do we do? How do we start to maybe culturally, society, whatever, kind of start to inform people on how to have sex? I don't know. You're going to talk about this much more eloquently than I am, and I hope you understand what I'm trying to ask, but it just feels very much like we're just thrown into this situation, here, have sex. It's okay, sure. And then most people pretend like they know what they're doing, and then they don't.
No, that is actually super clear and totally normal, because we're not taught, because it's idea, how do you have sex? Well, we got to start. Well, two parts is, first of all, you and I might define sex totally different. You and your husband may define it. My partner and I may define it differently. So what we have to do is say, when we think about sex, how are we really defining it? And knowing that it can look different than the next person. So this idea, how do we have it? Well, that's so individualized and different. And you can sure as heck bet that there's no one, well, not my experience. Someone says, okay, what do you know about sex? Here's the different types of sex you can have. Here's how you can define it, how it relates to feel comfortable to you. These conversations, majority are not happening. So we just figure it out and stumble upon it on our own. And for most people, depending on when you grew up, I'm very old, so I didn't grow up in the basis as a young kid with the internet and as a teen with the internet. But with that being said, most people learn. For me, we learn from talking with friends, talking with maybe someone I was dating, or reading, a Cosmopolitan or something like that.
An older brother or sister, or a babysitter or something, right?
Yeah, trying to tell you what, a little bit about it, or you hear stories about that girl that did so-and-so, and she did. I mean, that kind of stuff happened. Now people are learning about, of course, talking again, but most of it is through social media. It's through stuff they may watch or see online, and it gets really unrealistic expectations.
Yeah.
I think especially when it comes to what to expect for female pleasure.
Yeah.
You see, oh, she got pleasure that way. That's probably not accurate at all, but It's how you're shown. And then they bring that to the relationship, and they can't figure out why maybe their partner isn't experiencing pleasure. So we each are trying to figure it out on our own. But the more we do things like right now, talking about it, or taking away maybe just from today, saying, how do I actually define sex? And I'm in a relationship, so let me just ask my partner, how do they define sex? That's the start. And that's how we actually get better sex for ourselves, by having those conversations around it. Because it's hard enough to talk about, but we're expected to be super comfortable doing it. And that just doesn't add up.
Yeah, it's almost like there's this level of, I don't know if it's pride or you've said the word shame before, but it's almost embarrassing if you don't know what the person sitting across from you knows about sex. There's almost this little bit of, there's a lot of judgment, I think, in this realm. What would you say are some of the more common, or things that you come across, stigmas, misconceptions around intimacy, sex, all of this?
One of the common ones is that women aren't sexual beings. Men are the sexual ones, right? And they're the ones that won't say it's on their mind all the time, and it's all they want. They don't care about emotionally connecting.
Yeah.
And that's a myth. Now, is that applicable for guys? Sure, for a lot of guys, but not all guys. And we get really stuck in those stereotypes, and it's very detrimental. Because then what that does is that sets up an expectation for guys. Oh, you're supposed to want, need, have this. And, oh, I don't, therefore something's wrong with me. I'm flawed. I'm not going to be able to deliver an experience that she's going to like. And then that's that sexual shame that just destroys your sexual self-esteem. And for women, it's this idea, oh, well, you're not very sexual, or something's wrong with you if you've got a good libido. Or on the reverse, something's wrong with you if you don't have a good libido. If yours isn't matching your partner. What's wrong with you? Your partner wants sex and you keep rejecting them. And then what's wrong with you? I must be broken because I don't enjoy it or I don't have time for it. Or maybe it just doesn't come up in my head as much as it does for my partner because they're there comparing themselves to the partner and you're not the same people. So you can't have the same libido drives all the time. It's impossible.
Yeah.
So those are a couple. The other is that that sex is that it's okay that it's painful in the sense of experiencing pain during sex. That some women just kind of grind their teeth through it and just put up with it so they don't have to disappoint their partner, and that's not good.
Wow.
You don't have to put up with painful sex. That doesn't have to be that way. That's just a couple, but there's a whole lot out there.
Yeah.
About men, women differences, and most importantly those sexpectations we have for ourselves and for others.
Yeah. Do you think there is a way to broadly define what a healthy sex life looks like within a relationship?
Yeah, of course it's individualized, but the way to start that for yourself is to say, I give myself grace that it's going to change, right? Because healthy sex in a relationship might look one way right now, and then in a year it might look totally different for that same couple because you're evolving. If it looks the same, I'm concerned because that means something's not changing, good, bad, or ugly, or like you're on another planet somewhere. It doesn't mean that it's not enjoyable and it can't continue to be enjoyable, but it's going to look different. Your desires can be different. Maybe your fantasies are different. Your body's changing. Hormones happen. Age changes us. Different things go on for us. Health,
kids,
stress, kids, medication, different things, and stress. I keep saying that's such a big one. And then pain and medical issues and diagnosis and mental health affects those. And so to have a good quality, enjoyable, good sex life would be what feels good for me. What feels good for my partner? Do I know that about them? Do I know that about me? And I think that's where most people struggle. Like, how close are we of being, let's just say, on the same page sexually? Doesn't mean being the same. How close are we in range? If you're at, I'm just using these numbers, if you're one of you is at a 1 and the other's at a 10, not super close. But if one of you one day can be at a 3 and they're down at a 6, that's not bad. To think you're both going to be lined up on a 5, more days than not, it's probably not going to happen. It doesn't mean it's not enjoyable. It just means that you're approaching this from a place of understanding and being realistic in expectations. And my number one tip and secret to having good sex connection in your relationship is to have what I call a sexual buffet.
What is that?
Yeah, we're going there.
Yeah, please go there.
Well, I love a good buffet, which we don't have a lot of those with COVID right now. But what a sexual buffet is in a relationship is you got different options to choose from. Let's say you're feeling a little frisky or they're feeling a little frisky or somebody wants to make, or you just need a way to connect. It doesn't have to be, and I'm just going to say for an example, let's just say if we take a hetero couple, a male and female, just for an example. Okay, it doesn't have to mean sex has to look like penetrative PV sex, right? But both of you kind of want to get close. You want to be sexual. You're turned on. What are other options just besides that? Because one of you might not feel super great or may feel a bit icky or you had pasta and feel gross. Like whatever comes up, right? That you're like, oh, I just can't do this. But you know what I can do? Oh, how about we look at maybe doing a little hand job over here, a little bit of oral sex over here. What about I give you a sensual massage and you don't have to do anything for me. I just do some really sexual touch for you. Or some toys or different things or in a different room is just on the buffet. And the goal of a buffet is to change things up because you arrive and say, you know what, I want 1 or 2 of these little things, but I don't have an appetite for these others right now. Or sometimes you may be like, you know what, I got a bigger plate today. Let's try this and this, or I really need that, or I'll take a little of this. We got options, and we get so locked in those sexpectations of what sex is supposed to look like that we box ourselves in, and nobody's going to receive pleasure that way. And then what happens, it leads to more shame, more disappointment, more rejection. And then that causes the intimacy, which is the connection with one another, to go further and further down, which then affects trust as well.
As you're talking, the word that is just flashing across my brain is just, all of this is fantastic, but you have to be able to communicate. none of this, we can't read minds on this. And if I look at my husband tomorrow and say, what's our sexual buffet? He's going to think I'm insane. So I have to be able to talk to him about what that means for me. What advice would you give for sort of opening the doors to those types of conversations, especially if someone is already in that place of feeling insecure and feeling super vulnerable and nervous about it?
Well, what you can do is come in from a place of curiosity. For example, with your husband, hey, I'm just curious. I saw this article, or I was talking to this guest on the podcast, and they brought up this, or I saw this thing on Instagram, and I thought that's interesting. Have you ever heard of this? Or how do you think things are going in this way? Is it something you want to work on when it comes to just our physical connection? Are you good with where we're at? I'm just checking the temperature here. So you're kind of going in curious and light conversational versus coming in, we never have sex, or you never want me, or I feel rejected. That heaviness that we bring to sex just because we're human and we don't know any different if we don't have tools and strategies. So coming in with some lightness, some curiosity, not having an expectation of yourself that you got to carry the whole conversation or that you got to have the whole conversation right now. I'm talking about just taking little baby steps into it at your comfort level.
Yeah. And you've talked on your show a lot about, especially in those conversations, using the I statements and avoiding blame and just sort of sabotaging your partner.
Yeah, there's a difference in wanting to talk about it and then wanting to dump. Now, there's times where you want to dump and you want to go after them for whatever. Okay, do what you need to do, but then get ready to apologize and clean it up because you know you're in the wrong. And I hear a lot of times different people different clinicians are like, oh, I statements are outdated, or that's just not. I'm like, it never goes out of style because you're making it about you versus coming after someone. And you're going to get my attention much more if you're coming to me inquisitive and sharing something about you versus you coming telling me something about me that I don't want to hear. So I statements are so helpful. And I think one of the things that gets misunderstood about I statements is someone can think, oh, well, it's all about you. Start with I. And you can be like, well, my other option is to say, it's an issue with you, but I'm trying to share my feelings. So this is how I want to I'd like to start the conversation this way. And it's worked before. So there's different doors in. It's just, your partner better than anyone else does. And you know what's going to work. It's just the consistency of continuing to do the right thing that works and dealing with your emotions real time. And when you say something sideways or screwed up or say something wrong, you just, as quickly as possible, put your pride down and say, hey, I'm sorry how that came out. I didn't mean it that way, and that came out harsh. Sorry about that. Let me get a do-over. And that person builds trust.
And even just saying, this is uncomfortable for me. I'm not comfortable talking this way, but I would like to work on it or whatever. You like you said it much better. But I've also heard you say on more than one occasion, stop making sex mean so much. What does that mean?
We have a tendency to make sex so heavy, and we make rejection feel like you're like literally being rejected from the relationship as if it's this big, heavy thing you're supposed to do. And then if you're told no, it's like, oh, it's horrible. I'm dying because you said no. It's like not that big of a deal. Here's what I mean. And there's deeper issues going on in the relationship, and you've got all this heaviness where there's issues with trust. Absolutely. When sex comes up, as it can come up as a big deal if there's been trust issues happening, infidelity and issues around that. But making a big deal is leading it into an argument or making it mean how you value yourself. If I can't give to you sexually, that means I'm not of value to you. And that's got nothing to do. You're much more than that. Like, I'm a sex therapist. I'm like, get your value in sex. Good for you. However, that's not all who you are. And when I talk about the whole self model, we're talking about the 6 parts of who we are. Our sexual self is only one of the 6 parts of us. And is it an important one? Yeah, but it's just as equal as those other 5 parts of ourselves for a total of 6. So, when we make it this big thing, especially when they land in front of me, working with me, either in my online course or in one of my coaching programs, I can look and be like, sex is not the issue. It looks like the issue. It's like the iceberg sticking out the top of the ocean. You just see the point. Underneath that water, the big thing that destroys relationships, that big chunk of ice that blew out the Titanic, that's an issue with trust. Because what we know is that we have trust and we have intimacy, and intimacy is connection. There's actually 12 types of intimacies. Physical sex is one of them. And they move in tandem. So when people are like, oh, my physical intimacy's down, and I'm like, well, where's your trust at? Because your trust is down there too. And it doesn't mean someone's stepping out of the relationship. It just means that you've got a lack of trust in that person is going to be there for you, emotionally supportive, and all these different areas. And most of the time, it's an issue with trust in the foundation of the relationship, and sex is the symptom.
Okay, so sex. So I'm thinking of, just on different TV shows and conversations over the years with friends and whoever, when someone at some point admits that they're perhaps not having as much sex in their relationship as they were once, or that they've stopped completely, everyone sort of does the, oh, okay. And I think I'd like to know if there are other ways that, if there are other causes for it, other causes of struggle within the relationship that manifest in a deficit of sex. So you mentioned trust, I'm sure you're going to say stress. Are there anything else that we could sort of within our relationships be maybe looking for as, we're maybe not having as much sex. What else could you be looking for as a possible trigger or reason for that manifesting in that way?
Sure. One of the partners may have dealt with some type of trauma, and it might not look like trauma when we think of like kids trauma. It could be adult trauma. It could be a loss, not just the loss of a loved one. It could be a loss of a pet. It could be a loss of a financial status. It could be a loss of their status in their career. There's been a change, or some type of shift in that system, or maybe even their role in the family system. Their extended family has changed. Loss is very detrimental. It can lead us to feel like we're spinning, like, oh my gosh, like, where am I in the world now? Like, in the grand scheme of things, if I don't have this, if this is where I put, all of my identity into, and it's gone now. So that loss can really trigger that. And then we've got, of course, mental health, depression, anxiety, and depression is so often overlooked, especially in men. It's a little less acceptable for men to be depressed. It's okay for men to be anxious, but when it comes to depression, there's shame around that too. And depression takes a hard hit on men's sexual confidence and their libido and desire. And for women, if there's someone, if they have kids in the parenting role, depending on where they're at in their family, getting pulled in so many different directions, and there's inequality when it comes to chore intimacy. Okay, that connection we have with our partners doing chores around the home, that inequity can cause a lot of anger, and we know where anger goes for a lot of us. It's stuff and stack goes inside. So we stuff and stack and stuff and stack and stuff and stack all these emotions till it gets to the top, and we've built all this resentment inside. So now we're resenting our partner because they're not helping out enough. And then you're like, yeah, no, I don't want to meet your physical intimacy needs. Right. Because you're not meeting these other needs. I don't have time to think about sex. I'm trying to wash your clothes and do all these other things around the home. And that can also be reversed. We have chore intimacy inequality with men too. They feel like maybe their wife isn't helping out or not doing enough, depending on who's raising, who's doing what, and who's working in the home, outside the home, that type of thing. So it's not just women that experience that. Some men in some relationships experience the same thing.
What are your thoughts on scheduling sex?
I think it's a good idea because, well, first of all, people are like, oh, it's not spontaneous. Well, what do you really do that's spontaneous that you enjoy? Probably, every now and then you might take a bath or a shower because you got extra 5 minutes. But when it comes to sex, I like to think about scheduling sex more of an intentional thing versus we're putting it down at 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock on Friday night. I don't know who has sex at 8 o'clock on Friday night, because people got to be exhausted by the end of the week. I'm like, my partner would not even come try to make a move on me at the end of the week. I'd be like, no. This is a Netflix night. Like, we're not, like, you're exhausted. With that being said, it's the intention of, hey, honey, yeah, that's not happening. I love you very much. You know what? Catch me. I'm a morning girl. Catch me tomorrow morning, Saturday morning. We'll make this thing happen. That's when we look at scheduling sex. My intention is for me to initiate the next morning, because I'm a morning person. And he's not going to have to carry that part of it, because he tried. I turned him down. He didn't get his feelings hurt because he knows at some point I'm going to take him up on that, because we've built the trust around that, right? So scheduling sex is to be intentional. I want to make this time with you this weekend or this week. My goal is here. But if it doesn't work out tomorrow morning, I get in from a run and I'm like, no, he knows that at some point very soon I'm going to come back around.
Yeah.
Because I've said, absolutely, let's do this. And I keep my word in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it could be its own built-in foreplay in a way, like the anticipation of knowing when you think you're going to try to go for it,
Yes.
barring any, last minute sort of life
Yep.
wrenches that get thrown, but it's a way to look forward to it. And, you mentioned earlier, maybe not have the bowl of pasta if that is the time that you and your partner have decided you're going to make a go at it.
Yes. And from a pasta lovers, you have to tell yourself, you know what, there'll be another time that I can do pasta. It's not the last time I can do pasta. I can do pasta the next time. So you kind of give yourself grace that you don't feel like I'm neglecting something I want. But it's all about that intention and knowing that it's just moved to the front of the mind where maybe it was buried back in there. Now I'm just moving a little bit closer to be intentional and present and find an opportunity. And that's what that scheduling is about.
Yeah. So what are some of the emotional aspects of let's talk about heteronormative women for a moment. What does a woman need emotionally to be physically, I don't know what the word is, content with intimacy or prepared for it, or I don't know, maybe talk about the emotional and physical connection with intimacy in terms of just like a heteronormative female, basically me. Talk about me.
Like, can you just please tell me what I need to know? Yes, Kristie, let me tell you. You're exactly right, because most women, not all, but most of us as women, we need an emotional intimacy to have a physical intimacy, in the sense of we need to feel connected. We want to feel secure. We want to feel relaxed. We want to feel like we don't have to put more work into it. We want to feel like we've got somewhere to kind of dump out, vent, and talk without being judged or interrupted. That we got this space to just be able to be heard and to be listened to. And feeling secure in that is really powerful, because it means you can make a mistake and you're not going to get judged for it. Or you can say, no, honey, I just can't. Like, I wanted that pasta and I had it. And then your partner or your husband's not going to say, I know, but you told me and now you're changing your mind. Now I don't trust you. Like, you have safety to know that in an emotional safe place, you can say no and no one's going to get their feelings hurt, because they're not making it more than it has to be. They understand where you're at and y'all on that same wavelength. And that's super important when it comes to emotional intimacy, because we have to have that to really be vulnerable with physical intimacy, to really let ourselves shine and our walls drop. We want to have that security. And I think something around that too, that I think a lot of women maybe don't know, maybe never heard before, or maybe have heard it but not taken it to heart, is majority of their partners, majority of men, I'd say almost all that I've worked with, they would much rather have quality, enjoyable sex where the woman is present and talking or making some type of movement that she's enjoying it, like smiling or something. Would rather have that, I'm going to say once a week or once every 2 weeks, than quantity 3 times a week. They'd much rather have quantity, because most men want to pleasure their partner. They want to see the pleasure. They want to experience that. They just want to make you feel good, majority of men. With that being said, we as women have to take off this pressure that, oh, they're always wanting sex. I can't do it 3 times a week. Well, if you had it once a week that you've actually showed up and smiled and tried to enjoy yourself, have you become the star of the show? If not, let's talk to him about that. Because when you're lifted in that line, the star of the show, he's going to really enjoy it too. And you deserve that. You work hard enough.
Yeah. So that's making me wonder too. So generally speaking, right, we're speaking so overly generalized right now. I recognize that, but men want to know and want a lot of what they're getting out of it. A lot of the pleasure they're deriving is knowing that they are pleasuring you, the woman, in this situation. What can you say about the reverse? What are we as women deriving pleasure from in terms of the our partners? I don't know.
Right. Well, majority are like, knowing that security that they can please others, that their husband is so grateful for them having sex with them, of them taking care
Okay.
of them. They're like, oh my gosh, you're the best ever. Thank you. You're the best wife. Thank you for all you do. And those couple of seconds or minutes afterwards where they're just like all calm and connected, like that gives us like, okay, good. That's all you needed. That wasn't too hard. Right. And it's
Mm,
like, that's what it's about is majority. I know we're talking to men
yeah.
don't typically need a whole lot. They too want to feel secure.
Mm,
They want to feel wanted, but they do want to feel gratitude and that they're high on your priority list. Because especially as people, if people have kids, it's really easy for that husband to be the last one on that priority list, and they really feel that, and it can
mm,
really be damage to them too. So getting that pleasure of, yep, that feels good. I've satisfied him. He's going to show up and meet my emotional intimacy needs. He's going to help out and do and take care of because I met his physical. It's that dance of the physical and emotional intimacy. And that's where couples really thrive, is when the guy understands what the woman's emotional intimacy needs are. Oh, you need to feel listened to? Oh, come on, I'll listen to you. Because
mhm.
he knows you're going to take care of his needs too, and he's going to take care of yours. And so it's kind of giving and getting and receiving, and that giving balance that helps keep relationships super healthy.
Mhm. What do you think about like certain times of peak sexuality in terms of age range, things like that, men versus women? Are there generalizations you can make about that or what?
Well, it's interesting. I used to really be able to make good generalizations, and it's amazing what I learn like every single day. Like, I mean, what I mean by that is, women typically are finding their prime in their 40s and their 50s. The older they get, the more
Oh,
comfortable they get with
wow.
their body,
Hmm.
and the more they really give give less care about what
Hmm.
what other partner thinks or what other people think about them and their body image. That lessens over time. Now that's got to coincide too with hormones, with what their needs are, where they're at, because that has a huge effect. And a lot of times women don't, they discount that power of hormones. And anyone who has had a child knows the power of hormones and what it can cause and do, and or even women that have had any type of period. So with that being said, women a little bit later, they get more comfortable with their sexual prime the older they get. And men, depending on the man, their sex drive and libido will decrease a little bit, and they'll start having a little bit more sexual dysfunction issues. Now, there's a lot of medications to treat that for men. Absolutely, that's where all the research came, because they had to make sure those men were getting, their sexual needs met. Women are still behind on that. So,
The patriarchy.
yes, strikes again.
So how do you reconcile, let's say you've got the woman in her 40s that's finally body image, feeling herself, ready to go, and her husband is like, "What do you mean? We're just are we getting too old for this in a way?" Like, just I don't know. How do you reconcile the varying degrees of interest, I guess?
Yeah, and that can be really tough for a couple. So what we talk about is really what those needs are, and when, if there's any shame around that for the individual. For the guy, how are you feeling about your confidence, that you feel like it's going
Mm,
down a bit? Like now your wife's that rose up into space, she's ready, and you're less and less. What does it say about you as a man? Meaning those thoughts internal because of society. So we
right.
talk about that. Sometimes when the wife hears that, there's a way to connect. Oh gosh, I wouldn't want you to feel that way. What can we do? And so I come from a place working with people as from a collaboration. We don't have to compromise. We're going to collaborate. We're going to get ideas in there. What are your thoughts on this? How much, woman, how much self pleasuring are you doing, taking care of your own needs? Do you want them to show up more, a little bit less? Right, because she also may found more satisfaction with herself, because for a majority of women, it's easier with masturbation than it is with partnered sex, because you don't think about anybody else. But
Mm.
having those conversations and checking on each other's emotional and physical intimacy needs is where we start having that talk about kind of how do we collaborate and meet in the middle with this, so that you both get your needs met. There's give and take for both.
Yeah. I feel like masturbation for women is hardly ever acceptable to talk about. What I don't even know if I have a question really. I just heard you say it and I went, "Oh yeah, women can do that too, man." Like I just I don't where would you start with someone who has not been given the ability to talk about this and is like, oh, I wouldn't even know where to start?
Well, there's a lot of resources online, a ton of like literally step by step about how to start self exploring. But what I want you to think about is just if you're like, I don't want to read anything, just tell me. What you do is start to think about what things might turn you on. So we have things that turn us on that kind of light us up and things that turn us off. And most women, we're really good at identifying what turns us off. But think about, what are my turn ons? And isn't like just what touch on my body feels good. What feels good in my mind?
Mm.
What fantasy am I thinking? What movie do I watch that scene? And maybe it's not even sex. Maybe it's just something they're doing that you're like, oh, that turns me on a little bit. That's what you want to start thinking about. Get in touch with that first, because for women, we're up here in our brains to
Yeah.
our detriment at times. The majority of the time, that's where we're kind of creating the experience. And we have this reactionary response versus a spontaneous response that most men have. So thinking about what those turn-ons are, and then just saying, hey, well, I'm thinking about this turn-on. Are there parts of my body that feel really good to touch? If you're in a partnership, asking your partner, hey, can you give me a massage? Just a sensual massage. Stay away from the erogenous zones for right now. Just give me a massage. Let me see how it feels. And then when you're on your own, shower tub, privacy, door locked, whatever you need to do, just having some touch around your body. It doesn't have to be anything that might feel super uncomfortable, but just start exploring your body. And think of baby stepping into it and then just kind of giving yourself that space to explore.
Do you think that a man finding out that his wife or his partner or anyone, I guess, really, this would apply to anyone. Do you think that anyone in a partnership who finds out that their partner is masturbating is upset by that, is feeling funny about that? Does that, I would
Comes up
imagine
all
that,
the time.
yeah, I would
All
imagine
the
that
time.
would be like an immediate, well, what's wrong with me? Why are you doing that?
Mm-hmm. That's it exactly. It's that something, I must not be enough. As say
Hmm.
to if the guy's doing that and she finds out, oh, I must not be enough. That what's wrong with me? I don't please you enough. And I'm over there going, isn't it nice to have one more thing off your plate right now? Like, that's got nothing to do with you. That is, if he's showing up and you're wanting to have sex and he's wanting to have sex with you. Now, if you're not having any sex at all and you're wanting sex and he's doing nothing but masturbating, there's a problem. Y'all disconnected.
Mm.
But I would look at it as, how can that supplement our sexual buffet
Oh,
versus being a problem? Because it ain't all about you. Like, it's
right.
especially for men. Now, for some women too, but especially for men, masturbation is a way to blow off steam. It's a way to just like relax. A lot of
Mm.
men at the end of the day will like masturbate before they go to bed or the last night in the shower. And it's because that helps them relax. Now, for some women, that does too. Majority of women, the idea of masturbation may not be a way to relax. It might be, serve different purposes. Because the other thing about it, when we look at sex as a whole, and I'm talking about all the different types of sex, they're roles. They play roles for us in our
Mm.
lives. So we
Mm.
think about, what's the role of masturbation for me? What's the role of masturbation for you? What's the role of penetrative sex? What's the role of oral sex? So not that you have to overthink things, but sex isn't one thing. It doesn't mean one thing to everybody. And I think giving yourself space to think about that brings the seriousness and the heaviness of it down. And that's one of the concepts that I'm so passionate about, is kind of giving that space for people to talk about this stuff without being judged, and because when you have the freedom to talk about it, you never know what you're going to figure out about yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think almost any topic I explore on this show just comes back to slowing down and not only having conversations with the people around you, but first starting with the conversation with yourself. What do
Mm-hmm.
I want this to be? What does this look like for me? And just starting with that self-awareness and
Yeah.
recognizing, like you said, even thinking about, what turns me on. I can guarantee you I've like never sat down and been like, huh, Kristie, what turns you on? You just, you just
Yeah.
roll with the punches kind of thing for
Yes.
so long, right?
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
surviving. You're just trying to
Yeah.
survive. Let's be real. I mean, and there's no judgment in that. It's just, I kind of see it as you were just surviving until you now heard a question that has interest.
Right.
And now that question might roll around in your brain every now and then
Yeah.
some other synapses roll together. But this idea of not knowing where to start is so common and so normal. I have actually a needs guide that walks you through all the different areas of yourself that
Mm.
you have needs in. And so it kind of helps walk you through, how do you figure out those needs in each area of yourself without the guilt? Because the guilt and the heaviness, because most women, don't say, what do I need? It's like, what does
Yeah.
everybody else need? I come
Right.
last, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Your website is just it's so thorough and gives a wealth of resources. I saw on there. This is switching gears a little bit here, but I definitely want to make sure to ask you about it. That you created the Transgender Healthcare Dignity Model Certification Program. What is that? And I want to know more about that. What is that?
Sure, sure. I have two big parts of the work that I do: the relationship, sex, intimacy work with individuals and couples and programming courses. And then the other part of my business I do is LGBTQIA plus healthcare for health, behavioral, and wellness providers around the world. And what that
Mm.
is um, teaching providers how to give dignity care to specifically transgender, non-binary, and genderqueer patients and clients that they work with from an 8 unit model. So it's kind of taking the basics and walking them through everything they need to know as a provider so that they can show up and meet that individual where they're at without bias, assumption, getting in the way, because LGBTQIA, but specifically the transgender population, has had so much health inequality and so many barriers when it comes to healthcare, and
Mm.
they avoid healthcare because of that. And then they got more problems and issues because of that. And so I started working as a clinician 15 years ago, and that's when I started creating this model with the work in the community. And it's developed over time to now be a program that offers a certification for providers
Wow.
to get support through the year, and then to be able to kind of share that with other providers they work with.
Wow. So this is just as maybe some examples that are coming to mind for me, and I'm sure you can elaborate, but this is even just as simple but loaded as checking off male or female on a form, or knowing how to address someone as
Mhm.
he, she, they. I mean, it can be intimidating, but in that space critical to understand.
It is, and that what I find too, like I said, intimidating. Absolutely, I think majority of providers and anyone in the health behavioral wellness field, they want to do the right thing. They want to
Right.
meet that patient where they're at. They want to be supportive, but they don't feel confident in doing that because they've just not been trained, because there is little to no training out there.
Mm.
And that's what this is to serve, to help kind of bring the competency up, to improve the confidence of how they show up, because anything we feel as providers, it shows up on our face. And so it takes one raised eyebrow, one side look. And even though it might not be about that patient, they can easily internalize that because they've been dealing with this kind of stuff so long. So
Right.
the goal is to make sure, kind of my goal is to make sure every health, behavior, and wellness provider is trained in this model so that we have better health care because they deserve it.
Yeah. Is this something that providers would seek out with you, or are you approaching providers? How do we implement this in as many places as possible?
Sure. I do a lot of education and awareness around it, but most of the time someone will hear about it, or an association or organization will say, hey, we need to get some people trained in this, or they'll bring me in
Okay.
to do the whole hospital or the whole association or whoever the group is, and train everyone. It's a pretty intensive training. And yeah, so it's available online. So people can take it 24/7 and take a 4 hour course on their own, or I show up virtually or in person to organizations and teach live if they prefer. So we have a little bit more Q&A.
Is it available across the country, or is it, because I know sometimes certain states have weird things that,
Yeah, no, it's
no.
available across the world. I have
Okay.
people all over the world that
Oh,
have taken
all over the
the
world.
time.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay.
No
Um,
barriers when it
okay.
comes to education.
Okay. I love that. Has anything, well, I'm sure there have, but what surprises you most about the work that you do?
Hmm. Well, two things. Number one, that so many people sacrifice their life and stay in unhealthy relationships when they know they need to move forward, do what's best for them.
Mm.
But they keep trying, grinding until they've almost lost themselves. So when, as an outsider, I know what it feels to be on the inside of that. So there's no judgment. It's kind of like, it's heartbreaking to see that.
Hmm.
And the second part is, um, especially from the healthcare side, is how many people have the ability to pivot their view of something when they get more education.
Wow.
When
Yeah.
their assumption, when you say something or they see something or ask a question and they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. I'm like, That's it. That's a light bulb moment. That person's changed, and they're probably going to touch 20 more people that can be changed too. And that's how we get more of this equality healthcare out there. So
Yeah.
it's interesting. Never the same. I always say it's never the same hour twice, and I wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think that's one of the things that I'm hopeful about, but I'm also struggling with is it seems to me, just in my experience alone, that a lot of my own light bulbs took a level of time, attention, and commitment that I don't know that I would have had without hitting my own personal rock bottom. And I guess I wonder if there's a way to reach people before we get to that point. Do you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like there's a very sort of sensitive time frame where an individual, or at least just myself, was saying, oh, I know that I've been, educated in a traditional way. I know that I had a loving family and friends who cared about me and tried to expose me to as much as possible. But there were still blinders in so many areas. And it took, like I said, going through something on my own that I had heard about for years, depression, anxiety, postpartum, all of that to really go, oh, there's so much more out there. And I guess one of my personal questions, and I wonder if you have thoughts on it, is how do we start to reach people before it's personal to them? Like, how do we make people care before it's personal to them? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, since we don't have the magic wand, our best bet is I like to use this one question. So if we can ask everyone to ask themselves this one question: what can I say no to today? And here's why. When we force ourselves to say no to things in our life, it brings up some feelings. Oh, if I say no to them about that thing they want me to do, that means they're not going to like me. Oh gosh, I'm a people pleaser. Oh, I need to actually do that. What does that mean to me? What is my validation if I can't do that? If I can't take care of people? What can I say no to today? What if I say, no, I'm not interested in this? And then I got to deal with the kind of blowback from that. So if we can all get in that aspect of, because we're always like, yes, we need to say yes, yes, yes. But what if we say no to more things that don't serve us?
Mm-hmm.
And especially raised as, I don't know about you, but I was raised a very good girl. Like, you do the good thing, the right thing. You don't embarrass anybody.
Us, right?
Ooh,
Yeah.
yes, yes. And good girls don't say no. You say yes, of course. Yes, absolutely. How fast can I do it? Because we're people pleasers. We don't want to be seen as ugly or rude or not that nice girl. And so I've really seen my life pivot before. I mean, I've had my failure that absolutely rock bottom, but other things that could have went way down the trash can that I've called it by asking myself, what can I say no to today? Maybe it's no to that call. Maybe it's no to that extra bowl of pasta, whatever it is that's going to cause me some problems. Right. Saying no to that serves me. And when I do something for me, everybody around me gets a better me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really like that. You're so spot on. When you say no to something, it's not going to necessarily feel great. It's going to tell you something about yourself and why it was important to you at one time to say yes to that. Yeah, I really like that. Is there anything, Dr. Overstreet, that you would have asked yourself today that I didn't think to, or anything that you want to make sure we address and have everyone hear today?
No, just as a reminder that there's never going to be a better time. Things will never be slower. There will never be an exact day, week, minute, hour set aside that you're going to get to take care of all the things you need to take care of. So we got to stop kicking the can down the road about what our needs are. And again, if we really struggle to say, well, I just can't do this for me. Remember, just like I said, when we do it for ourselves, everyone else around gets a better us anyway. So in essence, we're really trying to get a better outcome for them, but it means putting ourselves first in that way.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're so right. It's a hard thing to do for some reason, but you're very right. So thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this. If you couldn't tell, I personally learned a lot, as most of my questions were about me, but this was great. Thank you.
You're welcome, Kristie. Thanks for having me, and look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks for the great questions.
All right, so I have to share that immediately upon re-listening to this conversation in the editing process, I thought, wow, that was really great. I'm so pleased with that. And it's not because I find myself to be doing anything extraordinary, but because I remember feeling such a level of discomfort around this topic, a level of discomfort that I don't often have when discussing other areas of life on the show. And that translated to me wondering if the conversation was good. I wondered if I asked appropriate questions. Was I too personal? I just had anxiety around the whole thing, and I built it up as I was worried about it. And now that I've listened to it, I'm like, yes, this is great conversation. But I think that it goes back to the points that Dr. Kristie made about how sexuality and intimacy aren't talked about enough. And when they are talked about, there are elements of shame, guilt, fear, and even secrecy around the conversation. I mean, here I am in my 30s, married for 5 years, 2 kids, and I'm fully aware of how those kids came to be, and felt a little funny talking about it with another grown woman. I mean, why? The more I wonder why, the sillier it honestly becomes. And I know there's trauma out there that I have to consider when I think about that and when I say that. And you know what, honestly, even more important to talk about sex, right? I don't know. My big takeaway from this conversation is first and foremost how important the work that Dr. Kristie is doing with regard to the Transgender Healthcare Dignity Certification Program. We need more of this kind of work, and I will link the information in the show notes if you want to learn more. And my other big takeaway were her points on approaching conversations around sex with curiosity, talking about trust, intimacy, and connection on a more regular basis, and that we need more education on this stuff. Dr. Kristie's website and Instagram account are great places to start. I'll link everything for you. And I just want to share that you'll hear more conversations on the show with sex therapists where, kind of true to form, my learnings, my level of comfort, and my curiosity increase. So keep checking back in for sort of the next installments of this conversation. And thank you for listening. And thank you, Dr. Kristie. I very much enjoyed our conversation, and I look forward to talking with you again. All right, see ya. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Sass Says is a production of Luann Nigara, Inc. This podcast is meant to be educational and not meant to replace professional therapy or professional medical attention. To learn more about today's show and what's new in my world, head over to sasssays.com. Thanks so much. Talk later.